Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on the Punic Wars. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to see what happens when Rome sets their sights beyond the Italian peninsula. They're going to come into contact with one of the great states of the ancient Mediterranean, and that, of course, is Carthage. So, we're going to start by setting the scene, figure out how we got to this point, then we'll see what Carthage has been doing, right? They were a big deal in the Greek world. We haven't heard from them for a while. Let's go see what's going on in the city of Carthage. Then we're going to go through the First, the Second, and the Third Punic War before wrapping up with some concluding thoughts. So, how did we get here? Well, we started way before the city of Rome was founded, when Italy had tribes all over the place in the early Iron Age, the Etruscans kind of being the largest and most complex of those early Italian tribes. And in 753 BC, we get Romulus founding the city of Rome, and for 250 years, the city is ruled by a series of 7 monarchs, starting very good and strong, ending kind of strong but not so good. And at the end of this point, we see Lucius Junius Brutus lead the revolt and start the Roman Republic, with the guiding idea that there will always be 2 people ruling in the city of Rome. So, we saw the conquest of Italy, that over the course of 250 years, Rome goes from this tiny little baby thing right here and takes over most of the Italian peninsula. And in doing so, they incorporate all these towns in a variety of ways. They start with these little towns right next to Rome, taking over a place like Tusculum, making them a municipium, giving them Roman citizenship. For Tusculum, it was without the right to vote. And by doing this, by taking over all these towns, they eventually come into contact with these larger tribes like the Samnites. And the Romans fight the Samnites for like 50 years, eventually defeating them, and that brings them into contact with an even bigger group of people, and those are the Greek city-states to the south. And in the Punic Wars, we see that Rome is able to defeat the Greek city-states, despite their kind of complexity in power, economically and politically and militarily. Rome's able to hold their own and even win that war. But now, holding the whole Italian peninsula, they are brought into contact with another group of people, and that's the Carthaginians. So let's go ahead and see what's going on with the Carthaginians. So, before the Punic Wars, Rome owns the Italian peninsula. All right, pretty good, Rome, not bad. Carthage, well, they're really doing quite well for themselves. They own almost all of North Africa. They own at least half of Sicily. They're into southern Spain. They have quite a bit of Corsica and Sardinia. And so by any kind of look at this, Carthage is looking more powerful than Rome, and they've kind of been more powerful for longer than the Roman people here. Now, Carthage itself is still ruled by an oligarchy. They've been in touch with the Greeks for quite a long period of time, and so they've started to adapt a lot of the different Greek things. So if you go to Carthage today, the remains look like this, and you're like, yeah, I mean, that's a totally good-looking Corinthian Greek column. And so much of the city has kind of adopted some of these Greek characteristics, and this oligarchy is still run by 2 suffetes, these 2 judges at the top. They still have a senate, and then the assembly of male citizens who vote upon things. Now economically, right, Carthage makes its money by seafaring trade. They're excellent seafarers, both economically and, as we'll see, militarily as well. And one of the many things they're trading are these kind of Phoenician purple dyes, right? Linens made from those dyes. And these are particularly cool. They're made out of these little murex shells, shellfish. So they're made out of the dye created from these shellfish. And when they go into the sun, when these linens go into the sun, instead of fading, they become even brighter and brighter. And this is actually where we get our term for the Punic Wars, right? So the Greeks call the Carthage, or they call this kind of region, or the region way out east where Carthage came from, they call that Phoenicia, all right? And they call it Phoenicia because that's their word for purple here, which comes from these dyes. And then when they come over and they settle Carthage, right, it's Phoenicians who settle Carthage in the 9th century BC. And the Romans, they call them Punici, right? That's their word, that's their kind of version of Phoenician. And so when we say the Punic Wars instead of the Carthaginian Wars, that's how we're getting to that name. Now, Carthage isn't just trading that. They've also got control of all these different kind of trade routes. And some of these are really important, right? Because they own a lot of Sicily and North Africa, they can control trade between East and West. And then as you go westward, they also control Gibraltar, right? So they've got a colony in southern Spain and in North Africa there. And making it out in the Atlantic is really, really important because you have access to tin up in Britain, which allows you to make bronze. And you also can go down south along the coast to sub-Saharan Africa. And there, of course, you have elephants. And we'll see shortly how those elephants end up playing a pretty big role in the Punic Wars. And what we'll see is that after the Punic Wars, Rome really takes to this style of agriculture. Now, militarily, this kind of makes sense. Carthage is awesome at sea, right? We just saw how they're these seafaring traders. They have an excellent, excellent navy. On land, however, it's kind of the opposite, right? They don't have a lot of fertile land. It's just that kind of narrow, thin strip up near the coast. And so what they end up doing is that they end up relying quite a bit on mercenaries to do their on-land fighting. And so one of the particularly relevant groups are the Numidian cavalry, right? They have a reputation for being excellent cavalry, and the Carthaginians rely quite heavily on them. So, how do we start one of the largest series of wars the world has ever seen? Well, it all begins in Sicily, right? So at this point, Rome's taken over the peninsula. They've gotten all the way down to that toe of the boot of Italy. And right across from that toe is the site of Messina or Massana. And at that site, we get a group of people known as the Mammartines, right? So the Mammartines are these mercenaries. They actually came from a region of Italy called Campania, near modern-day Naples. And they made their way down and they were helping out Syracuse. And after they helped out Syracuse, which is down here, right, they end up taking over the city of Messana. And they kind of treat everybody really bad. They kind of slaughter everybody and take over the whole city. Now, the few people who are left there, they're calling out for help, all right? So they take over, and then they call out, they're being besieged by Syracuse, so they call out to Rome for help, and then they also call out to Carthage for help. And Rome comes in and helps out the Mammartines, and now is kind of embroiling themselves in affairs in Sicily. And so once Rome shows up and they kind of take over the city of Messana, we actually get Carthage and Syracuse, right? So Carthaginians and the Greeks teaming up against the Romans. And perhaps surprisingly, the Romans are able to fight both of them off in the kind of initial battles of the war. And so Carthage goes back down to North Africa, Syracuse goes back down to southern Sicily. But Syracuse gets its army together and they're ready to go fight again, right? They're ready to go kick Rome out of here. But Rome once again is kind of able to hold its own. And Syracuse is starting to get angry that Carthage isn't sending any more troops to help them out. And eventually Rome is able to push down to the walls of Syracuse, ready to take over the city itself. And eventually Syracuse sues for peace. They say, all right, like we've had enough, let's go ahead and make an alliance. And now Rome has got the Syracusans on their side, and they are going up against the Carthaginians. So Carthage has basically got to fight at this point. They have enough kind of going on in Sicily that any incursion from Rome is going to be real problematic. Now in this battle, right, Carthage wants to make it a naval battle. And Rome at the beginning, right, with their navy, they're getting wrecked because they stink at sea, right? The whole conquest of Italy, this was a land conquest. And so once they start going up against very experienced naval combatants, they're losing, right? Think of it something similar to when the Persians came into to Salamis, right? And even though they outnumbered the Greeks drastically, the Greeks were natural sailors and they were able to kind of easily defeat the Persians. But the Romans are crafty, right? They might not have been great sailors, but they were pretty crafty. And so what they did is they built a whole new fleet. And in this new fleet of something called quinqueremes, all right? A quinquereme is kind of like a trireme on steroids. You could either have 5 people on one oar, or you could have 3 banks of oars with 2 people on each oar. And what they do is out of the top of this, they build a giant plank. And at the end of that giant plank, there's a large metal spike. And we call that metal spike the corvus, right? Literally meaning the crow, right? The kind of crow's beak. And what they would do is instead of really trying to fight them navally, they would start pulling up alongside these Phoenician or these Carthaginian ships, right? Normally what you do is you try to broadside them and ram them. They would pull up alongside of them, and then they would drop the corvus, right? And so the thing smacks into the other ship. That point lodges into the other ship. The Romans run across the plank, and all of a sudden they've taken this naval battle and they've turned it into a land battle at sea. And of course, for the past 250 years, Rome has been winning all kinds of land battles, and they're able to turn the tide in this war, making the sea battle into a land battle. Now, eventually, things go against Rome. So it turns out that even though this was an awesome invention, this corvus, it actually is like not very good for the stability of ships. And so Rome's ships keep getting destroyed in storms, even though they're very effective when they actually get into battle. And so they end up going down actually to North Africa. They lose a bunch of troops there. And then later on, they sail over to Sicily. They lose a bunch of their fleet there. Now, the problem here is that infighting ends up dooming the Carthaginians. On the one hand, you have Hamilcar Barca, the grandfather of Hannibal. And Hamilcar's doing great. He's like raiding all of these Roman towns. He's doing really, really well. And then on the other hand, we have this guy Hanno the Great. He's another of the Carthaginian leaders. And he's like basically trying to take the fleet away from Hamilcar. And they're never able to like really kind of settle on the correct approach to fight the Romans. And in doing so, Rome's able to recover their fleet, right? The one that had just been destroyed because all their Corvus-based ships keep sinking. They're able to sail over to the west coast of Sicily and sink the Carthaginian fleet, not even like their naval fleet, like a kind of a merchant fleet there, destroying their supply lines. And in destroying their supply lines, the Carthaginians essentially have to ask for peace. So, the Romans win the First Punic War after about 24 years, from 264 BC to 241 BC. And going into this war, it wasn't clear at all who would actually win this thing, right? It wasn't like Rome was militarily superior or Carthage was that much weaker. It was a fairly even fight, but Rome was able to pull ahead. And after this war, we see Rome taking over the island of, or the Italian peninsula, as well as the island of Sicily, and they make Sicily the first province. About 20 years later, we get the start of another conflict between Carthage and Rome, the Second Punic War. And this is the one where we get Hannibal Barca, right? Hannibal the Great. So, at the start of the war, Rome has expanded even further. Now, in addition to Sicily, they've also got Sardinia and Corsica, and they make Sardinia the second Roman province. But Carthage has recovered really, really well. They've actually almost got even more territory than they began with because they've expanded up into Spain quite a bit. And Spain's really, really useful because it's got excellent natural resources, a lot of metals in terms of silver and copper and things of that nature, which help the Carthaginian economy. So, at this time, Rome and Carthage have something known as the Ebro Treaty, and you can see the Ebro River outlined in green here. And the basic rule is that Carthage can't take any lands beyond the Ebro River, right? And so Rome kind of has right to everything over here, even though they haven't conquered these city-states, and Carthage can do what it wants down here, but not cross the Ebro River. But nevertheless, Rome is allied with one of the towns there, a town by the name of Saguntum. So what ends up happening is that Saguntum starts causing problems for the Carthaginians. Rome's allied with them, and Hannibal Barca, right, so one of the new young generals of the Carthaginian troops, says that Saguntum is basically not acting right. And he goes in and he destroys the town. He takes over the town. Now, Hannibal was the grandson of Hamilcar Barca, the great general of the First Punic War. And from a very early age, he swore in front of the fire at the age of 9 that he would always be an enemy to Rome. And the troops love him, right? He eats with his troops and he sleeps on the ground with his troops. And in every kind of way, even the sources written by the Romans, he is a very heroic, a very courageous, a very intelligent Carthaginian leader. So Hannibal besieges the site of Saguntum, right? And so you can see what it looks like today. It's actually a delightful little town to go to, and you can see what it looks like in antiquity as well. And he was doing this, he besieged the town because it was harassing other Carthaginian territories. Now Rome debates whether to go to war, they decide yes, but Hannibal's got a strategy, right? A very different strategy than they adopted in the First Punic War. His idea is at this point in time, Carthage is really strong on land, and they're really weak at sea. Their navy was kind of decimated at the end of the First Punic War. And so what he's going to do is he's going to march through Europe into Italy, and he needs to make it so that they can fight a war on one front. Because infantry moves really slowly, he can't be in a lot of different places at once, they need to fight a war on one front. Rome, on the other hand, they want to take the attack to the Carthaginians. So they want to attack both in Spain, they want to move down through Sicily to attack North Africa, and it's going to be a matter of who can impose whose will at the beginning of this. And it turns out that it's Hannibal who can impose the will on the Romans. So Hannibal starts this crazy march, all right? So with something like 30,000 troops and 9,000 cavalry and 37 war elephants, he starts this march at the beginning of winter. This is the worst time to start a march. Going up through Spain, through southern France, and eventually hitting the Alps, all right? And so he marches his troops through the Alps in the middle of winter, and something like half of them make their way through. He ends up losing about 10,000 soldiers, he ends up losing half his cavalry, but eventually he makes it to northern Italy on the other side of the Alps. And this is where we start to see the genius of Hannibal at play. There is perhaps no better battlefield technician than Hannibal Barca. So at the Battle of Trebia, Rome brings 40,000 troops. So he's got double the number of troops as Hannibal, and yet they can't win the victory. Hannibal basically forces him. He basically lines up his troops and just waits, while Rome is the one who have to kind of cross the river, and then as they approach the Carthaginian lines over here, the Carthaginians are in blue, the Romans in red, he's able to swoop in with his cavalry from the flank and attack the Romans from the side. So the first large battle of the Second Punic War goes to Hannibal and goes to the Carthaginians. Now, a year later, Hannibal is pushed south quite a bit, and the Romans are marching out to meet him. And where they're going, right, they're going by a lake by the name of Lake Trasimine, and they're walking along the path which skirts the lake. Little do they know that Hannibal's troops, the Carthaginians, are in the forest up here. So this is a steep lake, right? It's a steep cliff going into the lake, then there's the path, and then it goes up further on this kind of mountainside into the trees. And Hannibal's troops are all up there in the trees, and at the right moment, when they're on that path in between the trees and the lake, Hannibal's troops rush down and basically slaughter a bunch and push the rest into the river. And something like 36,000 Roman troops end up dying at the Battle of Lake Trasimine. So Hannibal's now won at Trebia, and he's now won at Trasimine, and neither of these are his largest victory. That's yet to come. Now Hannibal's got a couple options. He actually acts like he's going ahead and marching on the city of Rome, but he doesn't do that. And this kind of, you have to understand the history of Italy to understand what his strategy is. Rather than marching on the city, he knows that it's been like a couple decades since many of these towns were conquered by the Romans. And so rather than march on Rome for some massive siege of the city, his goal is to take these city-states and get them to flip, right? Basically say, hey, you don't like the Romans any more than we do, right? Why are you paying them taxes? Why are you beholden to them? He's trying to break the alliances Rome has with all their municipia and their allies and that sort of thing. And so he ends up marching south here. Now what Rome does is they've lost two really big battles in a row. And they elect somebody by the name of Quintus Fabius Maximus as their consul. And Quintus Fabius Maximus is known in Latin as the Cunctator. And what this translates as is the delayer. So Quintus Fabius Maximus, his strategy against Hannibal is like, if you can't beat him, run away from him, right? So he's basically saying, let's try to starve Hannibal out of Italy. We just won't fight battles against him. We'll mess with his supply lines, right? We'll kind of send in like short little quick raiding groups to mess with the troops a little bit. We'll try to, any allies that he's flipped, we'll go flip them back, but we're not gonna fight him. And this actually works fairly well for a while. But the Romans, it's just not in the Roman spirit. They don't like this idea of kind of running away from troops and hoping that the other side gets tired and goes home. And so the following year, a new set of consuls are elected, and they decide they're going to take the fight to Hannibal. At this point in time, Hannibal's in southern Italy at the site of Cannae down here. So we get Trebia way up here, we get Trasimine kind of in the middle, and then now he's down in the south of Italy at Cannae. And Rome's got something like twice the number of troops once again. You can see how thick the Roman lines are. And what ends up happening is Hannibal aligns his troop in a way so that it's kind of weak in the front, weak in the middle, all right? And so what ends up happening, Rome ends up sending their forces, they push into the middle, and they start pushing, and they're doing really well. And they're pushing, and they're pushing. They're feeling like they're gonna break the line. The Carthaginian line keeps moving backwards and backwards and backwards. But as this happens, right, as the Romans keep pushing back, and the line bends but doesn't break, the cavalry on the side of the Carthaginian lines start to loop behind the Roman legions. And so now all of a sudden, because the line didn't break and the cavalry has looped around, Carthage has got them pinned in on all sides. And it was said that the slaughter took nearly a day. It took like 8 hours of just constant slaughter because it takes a long time to kill people. And the next day, something like 70,000 out of the 80 or 90,000 troops that Rome brought to Cannae were dead. And this is generally considered the kind of largest defeat that the Roman people ever had. So Hannibal's now 3-0. He won at Trebia, and he won at Trasimine, and he won a resounding victory at Cannae. And some people think that if he had then marched on the city of Rome, if he had right after that taken the fight to the city itself, he could have taken the city of Rome. But he doesn't do that. He continues kind of moving around in the south of Italy, trying to flip these towns that were allied with Rome and make them allied with Carthage. And during this time, we get a guy by the name of Lucius Cornelius Scipio, later to become Africanus, take over part of the army. And he once again brings back this idea that we need to take the fight to them. And so he's able to do that. He's able to go start fighting in Spain. And then Hannibal's still got kind of like cousins and brothers and stuff over here, and Scipio is able to be really effective over there. And eventually he's able to convince them that the fight needs to go to North Africa itself. And so in 204 BC, Scipio heads to North Africa. And what he ends up doing there is he starts kind of messing around with the Carthaginian allies in North Africa. And Carthage then starts a series of negotiations with Scipio. But they're not real negotiations. They don't actually want to negotiate peace. What the Carthaginians want to do is they want to give Hannibal time to get back to Africa and to defend them. And so Hannibal eventually gets back, and they're setting up for like kind of the decisive battle at the plain or at the site of Zama. So the Battle of Zama occurs in 202 BC. And Hannibal's relying on the Carthaginian war elephants to basically scare the hell out of the Romans, right? Can you imagine never having seen an elephant in your life before, and all of a sudden you have this 2-story high animal weighing tons and tons and tons charging at you? But the Romans, once again, are fairly strategic. And so what Scipio has done is he's aligned his troops. He's aligned those maniples. Remember, they're very agile. They can move very, very well. He's aligned them so that when the elephants start charging, the maniples scoot to the side and they leave these lanes for the elephants to run through. And after this happens a while, the elephants kind of start going crazy and they're just running everywhere now. The elephants end up doing as much or more damage to Hannibal's own troops as they do to the Romans. And so the Romans are able to defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202, and the following year they're able to kind of basically make Carthage submit and end the Second Punic War. So Scipio goes back home and he's hailed as the Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. And he's given a triumph in the city, and Carthage is made to pay kind of a huge debt to the city of Rome. Kind of surprisingly, Hannibal himself survives, and he's actually an administrator in Carthage for quite a while. And one of the amazing things is that this huge debt that was to be paid to Rome, it was supposed to be paid over the course of 50 years. Hannibal's able to pay the thing off in like 10 years. And Rome is like so upset by this because they want Carthage to be in debt to Rome for a long period of time. They basically don't let him pay the debt off early. And eventually Hannibal's got to escape. The Carthaginians are going to give him over. And so he actually escapes to a guy by the name of Philip V of Macedon, so one of the Macedonian kings, and he goes and lives in that court for a while. And we'll hear a little bit about him later on. So after the Second Punic War, Rome not only has the boot of Italy, it's got Sicily, and it's got Sardinia and Corsica, and now it's got quite a bit of Spain as well. So Rome continues to expand, it continues to kind of include these areas as provinces into its burgeoning empire. Now Carthage, once again, still controls quite a bit of North Africa, but it's lost this very valuable land in Spain. All right, so Rome is 2-0 in the Punic Wars so far. Let's take a look at the Third Punic War. So one of the things is in the first two Punic Wars, nobody knew who would win when the war started. Rome and Carthage were fairly evenly balanced, and there was no guarantee that Rome was going to come out on top. The Third Punic War is a different story. This is essentially a massacre. Now, one of the leading proponents of fighting Carthage was this guy right here, a guy by the name of Cato the Elder. And even though he starts as an administrator in Spain, and he's fairly friendly with the populations there, he eventually ends up in Carthage, sees how well it's doing in such a short time after the Second Punic War, that he goes back to Rome, and there in Rome he ends every single speech he has with the phrase Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. And eventually he talks the Roman people into doing this. Now the Romans can't totally break the treaty, but they kind of run into some luck when the Carthaginian oligarchy, the pro-Roman Carthaginian oligarchy, is overthrown, right? So there's a little rebellion, and there's kind of an anti-Roman contingent that comes into power. And that anti-Roman contingent then messes with this guy, Massinissa, who's one of Rome's allies kind of in that local area there. So Massinissa is kind of messed with by this anti-Roman contingent of Carthaginians, and that's just enough to say, all right, we're coming in. And so Rome comes in, and first they make some demands on Carthage, right? So it says, hand over a bunch of Roman hostages. And Carthage is like, okay. And then Rome's like, all right, also hand over all your weapons and armor. And Carthage, surprisingly, is like, okay. So they give Rome all their weapons and armor. And then finally Rome is like, all right, actually we need you to destroy your whole city and move it 10 miles inland. And obviously Carthage can't destroy its own city. And so now they have to put up a fight, but they don't have any weapons and armor, and so they start scrambling trying to get all this stuff together. At that same time, the Roman fleet is sailing in, and they start to blockade the city, and it's a 3-year kind of naval siege of the city of Carthage, but eventually Rome gets through. And when Rome gets through, things are not very pretty. So not only do they destroy the whole city, they burn the whole city, they kill tens of thousands of people, and they take even more than that, and they sell them off into slavery. And then to the city itself, after it's burned, they go around the countryside throwing salt into the ground with the idea that this salt is going to make sure that nothing can ever grow there again. This is really the kind of final stand of Carthage. Now what's going to happen? We're going to see actually within 20 years, Rome's going to think that it's a great idea to put a colony right here and probably wish they hadn't salted the earth. But for now, Rome is trying to end Carthage once and for all. So, by the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BC, Rome has the Italian peninsula, the first province of Sicily, the second province of Sardinia. They've got the island of Corsica. They've got territory in Spain, and now they've got a new province down here, the province of Africa. So let's wrap up with a couple concluding thoughts. So the map kind of says it all, right? We can see this Roman expansion at the beginning. Carthage has places over in Spain, all along North Africa. Rome has territory in the Italian peninsula. But through this series of 3 wars, we can see the expansion of Roman power. So after the First Punic War, they are now players in the Mediterranean at large, not just in the Italian peninsula, as they've taken over the island of Sicily. Between the first 2 wars, they're able to add Sardinia, and they're able to add Corsica. After the Second War, they're able to add areas in Spain to their area control, and by the end of the Third, they're able to integrate regions of North Africa. And so over the course of 120 years of fighting between the Romans and the Carthaginians, Rome is able to take itself from the leading power in Italy to the leading power in the Mediterranean. And so that ends up being the kind of result of the Punic Wars.